In this video, we'll be covering how to restrict access to local resources for VPN users. The first thing you'll notice here is that whenever you enable any of the VPN solutions, it will create one of these allow policies for the predefined group corresponding to the VPN option that you've selected. What you will also notice is that these policies are very wide open. They allow access to any IP address that is both internal or external across any ports and any protocols. What this means is any users in these groups are able to access pretty much anything through the firebox, providing there's no other policies in the list to restrict their access. But of course, leaving wide open access is not necessarily the most secure approach. So it is recommended to create policies to restrict access or reuse some of your existing policies that you're already applying to internal users and apply them to the VPN users as well. This is especially true when it comes to internet access through proxy policies. Let's explore some of the ways in which we can restrict access for these VPN users. Keep in mind that these steps can be done in either the web UI or in Policy Manager. The first thing I'll take a look at is how one of my VPNs is currently set up. I'll use the SSL VPN as an example here, and I will go to the Authentication tab. You will notice here that the predefined SSL VPN users group is permanently selected. You'll also notice the text here says that if you add any other users and groups to the list, they will implicitly be part of the SSL VPN users group, because this group represents any user connected through the SSL VPN, regardless of the authentication server or whether it's a user or group. This is true for any of the mobile VPNs, and you can also notice here that I have already selected an existing Firebox DB user, but I can also go and select a Firebox DB group in this list. I can also enable an Active Directory server that I have up here. Upon enabling that, you've noticed that the list down here gets a bit longer because I already had some pre-existing Active Directory users and groups created on the Firebox. What I'm going to do is just select everything in the list here so that all of these users and groups are part of the SSL VPN users default group. I'll go ahead and click OK. You'll notice here in this list of policies I currently do not have any users or groups listed except for the VPN policies that were automatically generated, but the rest of these are just using zone aliases. Let's say, for example, I wanted to restrict SSH traffic for users across the SSL VPN. What I will do is modify this policy, and I can come in here and click Add User, and I can either do it by group or by user, depending on how strict I want to be. In this case, I will select group, and I'm going to say that the support team needs access to the internal servers. What this will do is it will allow this support group access to the internal server on port 22, whether this support group is internal or external. What I mean by that is they can be connecting from a local interface or through the VPN. So the group will work regardless of where the user is connecting from. Of course, creating this policy is not currently granting this group any more access than they would have already had through these wide open any policies down here. But the goal is to disable or delete these policies and only allow explicit access through the policies I have defined above. So if I follow with this example, I now need to consider the internet access. So I would need to restrict it through my HTTP and HTTPS proxies as well. And here I can go to add a group, and in this case I'm going to also select the support group, but I will also add the training group, and I will do the same thing on HTTPS. What this is allowing me to do is reuse my existing proxy actions and configuration for these remote users, whether they are, again, internal or external. So it really cuts down on the number of policies I'm going to need, and it ensures that when users connect remotely, if I am using a full tunnel or zero route VPN, which is the default option, when the internet traffic comes through the firebox, they'll be subject to the exact same proxy restrictions as well as security service scanning to protect those users' internet traffic. If I move along, I'm going to do the same on the RDP, and I will add the support group, and in this case I will add the training group and marketing. This way I'm opening up a bit more access to my internal server. And of course, they would likely need DNS, so I will add the exact same groups there. And you'll notice that it does append the domain information, so I know which server this is. This is an Active Directory server. I can see which groups have access. And now it looks like those users have exactly the access I would like them to have. So I'm going to disable this policy. And I'll do the same for the other VPNs in case they connect using any of those other methods. Now, when these users connect to the VPN, they are only going to have access to the policies that I have explicitly granted. So only these ports are going to be available for these users. They will not have access through anything else. Furthermore, they will have these subscription services applied on any policies which are using them, mainly the two proxies that I have right here. Because if they were just going through any packet filters, none of this is very restrictive, and this would allow all kinds of other traffic, including torrent and malware and all this other stuff that you would not want your remote users sending into your network or out to the internet using your public IP. If there are any users or groups that I have not added to a policy, then they will not have access to any resources upon connecting to the VPN. If you don't want to be very granular with adding specific groups or users to policies, but you still want to restrict which ports they have access to, as well as apply proxies and services to users, you could do this instead. You would just not use that particular group and instead use the larger group that includes everything. In this case, SSL VPN would work, and that means anyone connected to the SSL VPN would now have access to SSH on this internal server. There may even be a situation where you have outside contractors or other people that you need to have access to your network that are not on your Active Directory server, or you simply want to separate those users out. What you can do is use the Firebox DB or some other authentication server and create a dedicated group for those users. That way you can add this type of group to some policies that have more restrictions. So if I were to create some new policy here for RDP, and I would like this to be restricted to those users, I can simply remove the local interface alias and then put in the remote contractors group here, and then define which servers or resources they need access to. I can also use this for more clear logging, as well as to disable access should those users no longer require it. And keep in mind, no VPNs are considered trusted or optional networks, so these zone aliases would not apply to the VPN connection. Furthermore, even though we've disabled this policy for the remote contractors, this policy right here has the SSL VPN users group, which does contain the remote contractors. So they would still have SSH access in this example, which is why you need to be careful about where you're using the VPN built-in group, since that includes anyone that's connected across that VPN. Furthermore, if you need additional groups or users for your third-party servers, you would simply add them on the Users and Groups menu, and that's how I've defined multiple Active Directory related examples here. Once you have everything created and you've input the appropriate groups into the right policies, go ahead and test your work by connecting as a user in one of those groups and validate that you can access everything, and then add more policies as necessary. If you are unsure which ports and protocols you need to open for your remote users, it is recommended to do a baseline and look at some logs either on the Firebox or on a Dimension server or WatchGuard cloud. If you need assistance with this process, it is recommended to watch one of our other video tutorials on maintaining and auditing your policies. To recap, the default any policies are not restricted at all, and that goes for both internal and external access. You're granting people who are in those groups full access to anything on any IP address on any port in a protocol. Next, you need to ensure that the users and groups are part of the built-in VPN group if you want to grant them access through any VPNs, and then you can use either the default built-in group or the specific users and groups you've added to it in any of the policies you've created. When it comes to restricting access, your best bet is to disable or delete those default any policies and create specific policies for the users and groups that you want to grant access to your network. For more information on creating policies, users, or groups, please use the WatchGuard technical search.